Society isn't doing that great. I think that no matter what your political or religious views, we can all agree that there's something of a bleak mood in the air. To be honest, it kind of feels like old men or young women are in charge of everything. Things seem stagnant, and where they aren't stagnant, it feels like they're breaking down. And many people agree that one of the reasons for this malaise is that something is off with the dudes. Something is wrong. There's a particular host of pathologies at work with a vast majority of the young men. Why are they so dissatisfied? Why aren't they working? Why aren't they doing good in school and so forth? Why aren't there enough good men around for women to get married to, and so on? And there's infinite possible causes that you could get into for this general malaise of what started this or what started that. But it seems to me that a lot of people settle on the basic idea of men need to stop playing video games and watching anime, and they just need to start stepping up and taking responsibility, blah, blah, blah. You've heard it all before. I'll link to relevant articles in the description if you haven't heard any of the doomsaying about this topic. A lot of what I'm about to say could apply to both video games and to anime, maybe just being on the internet in general. They're a joint package for a lot of people. I like to think of all of them together as virtual worlds or the virtual life. But I'm mainly going to frame this conversation in terms of video games. So how should we take this challenge that young men need to drop the controller and man up? We, the sensitive young men, we, the gamers, most derided and persecuted of all groups on earth, should we just laugh this off? I think maybe trying to deal with all of society's problems are a bit too vast for us to be able to fit into our heads at once. We can collect bits of data. Maybe it'd be easier to answer the question if it were phrased this way. Do video games destroy individual people? Well, let me tell you a story about a gamer, which would be my story. Some of my earliest memories are of playing video games or of watching my family members play video games. I probably fell in love with Pokemon when I was 5 and was obsessed, and I distinctly remember having all 151 Pokemon memorized by at least the time that I was 6 years old in kindergarten. Imagine if I had cared about the table of elements that much. Maybe I could be like a world-changing chemist or something by now. I don't really care about science at all. Anyway, that's a tangent. I grew up playing video games all the time. Parents would set, electronic time limits, but it was still the thing that I was the most passionate about and thought the most about. So even when I wasn't able to play video games because my parents were like, yeah, you've been looking at screens for too long, I would pore over my strategy guides and I would imagine myself playing the video game. So this was a very lonely childhood, and not because I didn't have the potential to make friends. It was more that I preferred playing video games than to hanging out with other children. And when I did hang out with friends, I just wanted to play video games with them. And so as a result of, I think, just my mindset as a child, I grew up fairly lonely, though I ended up bonding with certain internet friends over, of course, certain video games and different forums and chat rooms devoted to video games. As a teenager in particular, I became addicted to video game reviews on YouTube and sort of gamer culture content along those lines. I was probably watching hours of YouTube every day, maybe even more at that point than I was actually playing video games themselves. That's how much of a gamer I was, that I was maybe becoming more fixated on just knowledge and lore about the video games that were coming out. Even if I didn't necessarily want to play them, I still wanted to watch other people play them. Then I went to college, and I sort of had a transition and stopped playing video games, stopped watching YouTube all the time, and I think part of that was because I was sort of ashamed. At that point, I'd become much more aware of myself and how other people were different than myself. Not everyone spent hours a day watching YouTube. I became more aware that other people have actual lives that involve working with reality. They have families. They interact with people. They have friendships. And I started making friends with some of them. And these people knew how to cook. They knew how to socialize, how to make things. They had all of these incredible skills that I didn't, because they had spent even if they were, my age, they had spent their youth doing things in the real world. And I was envious. I thought they were cooler than I was. They were just better people than me in a lot of different ways. And so what was especially embarrassing was getting clocked by other people as a gamer at this point. Multiple times in college, people told me, like, you seem like a gamer, and I would deny it. No, I'm not a gamer anymore. I'm not one of those losers. And because by that point I wasn't playing that much, maybe occasionally, but I was mostly drifting away from it. I was just embarrassed by it all, and I felt like I had to focus on catching up on being a human being in the real world. Probably the last video game I truly fell in love with was during college, was Dark Souls. And after that, after beating it, I have never really felt like I needed to play another video game again. Nothing else could satisfy. Nothing else was as intricate or as fulfilling of a dreamlike experience as that game in particular gave me. So I was like, that's what I want out of video games. I never really have to play another video game again, to be honest. Even if I try to load up a game, I usually get bored pretty quickly. What's interesting is that the more bored and / embarrassed that I was about video games, the better I got at socializing with real people. And I began making all kinds of new friends. But only occasionally, maybe once a year, I'll get struck with this sudden longing to play some of those old games again. This sort of faint longing for this kind of special deliciousness that only video games can provide, that no other pleasure on earth quite hits the same note. Anyway, circling back around now, it's for the first time in a while I tried to play some old video games again, just for the nostalgia factor and sort of thinking through where I'm at now. I think I mostly enjoy the fact that I'm a very different person than I was when I was a teenager. I like that I have more productive hobbies like writing or even making videos, playing guitar, and most of all, hanging out with real flesh and blood friends on a regular basis. I could do that all day, forever, and never miss video games. So I definitely think I'm in a much healthier place in general with how I use my time than when I was young, addicted to video games, and lonely and very depressed. Having hobbies in physical space are just more fun. They feel more real than accomplishments in video games. And then when I'm done with something or I finish something, then that's something that I can come back to. It's not just an ephemeral experience of fun. There's something being built more long term, whether it's like a specific work of art or something that I've recorded, or just, building a deeper friendship with somebody else. So I feel like I see both sides of this kind of issue that I've brought up. Of like, I've seen the joys of video games. At other points in my life, I've felt kind of negative towards video games. Now I feel like I'm coming back towards the middle, trying to find a more moderate position. So when it comes to my current views on these things, I've got some good news and some bad news for my fellow gamers. And don't worry, I'll talk about what's really good about video games in a minute, but I'm going to give the bad news first. And yes, I'm going to be projecting my experience on, every other gamer, not because they necessarily do have my experience, but because I don't think I'm the only one. So let's face it, the bad news. Gamers are synonymous with worthless people for a reason. Because worthless people love video games, and video games help people become more worthless. That's just the way it is. And often, if you want to be more of a worthy human being, more of a worthy man, cutting away at video games is probably going to be the first step. Men who could be much greater than they are currently, right now, wasting away their lives on gaming. Because at least in the video game, they can feel like they're getting some simulation of victory, when real life the victories in real life don't come as easily. In the video game, you're spending your time accumulating fake skills and fake resources when you could be gaining real skills and real resources. And I'm not trying to scold anyone for playing video games. Like, I've spent thousands of hours of my life playing video games. So I'm not trying to make you feel bad about you wasting your life. I'm just asking you if you feel like you're wasting your life, or if you feel like this is an accurate description of what's going on with many people, not necessarily all gamers. But I have more bad news. I'm going to keep going. Not only does it give you this sort of false sense of accomplishment, games train you, I believe, to expect very clear and rigid rules for interacting with the world. In a game, you put in a certain kind of input and you get a certain predictable output. But that's not how a lot of the real world works. A lot of reality is chaotic and ambiguous, especially interacting with other people who always have these kind of unspoken and unpredictable rules of play, as it were. Spending all of your time with video games is setting you up for enormous amounts of frustration in dealing with other human beings who don't share that same niche interest that you have in, a particular franchise with its particular rules and its particular world. While you're accumulating esoteric lore by memorizing certain wiki pages and strategy guides, quote unquote normal people are spending their time accumulating lore, as it were, about actual people around them. And not that needs to be everyone's strong suit. Not everyone needs to be normal. That's not necessarily what I'm advocating for. I think there's ditches there as well, becoming too gossipy and too focused on your image and being super basic or something like that. But that basic habit of studying how the actual people around you work in their chaos and ambiguity as compared to the sort of safe, clear rules of a video game, that is a really valuable skill to learn, and makes you a more valuable person when you're capable of handling a greater range of human behavior around you. So I think that the more time you spend gathering lore about real people and what they care about, how they behave, and the easier it gets to be around them and make friends. So as much as I currently would say I do love video games, I have to admit that having been a gamer has seriously inhibited friendships with non-gamers. And friendship is really important to being a human. That's been my experience, and I would challenge you to see if that's been your experience as well. Maybe you can claim that you're like content being a gamer hermit, just like playing your things alone on some lofty mountaintop. But deep down, I think everyone should practice being friends with people who don't share their like immediate hobbies and are maybe interested in things other than, pressing buttons all day. And to kind of bring it back to the beginning topic, I think that all of this is part of why everything feels so terrible in the world right now. People have fewer friends than they used to, and they're trying to fill that void with video games, which I don't think that video games can. So despite all of that kind of bad news, all of that sort of doom and gloom, I'm not casting video games in toto into the furnace. I refuse to be a video game hater. I refuse to hate on gamers. Some people get really reactionary, and I've even heard some dads say, "I'll never let my kids play video games." Due to some bad experience that they had or what they've seen it due to guys that they know. And I think that is so sad. Having that mindset is just being paranoid and safety obsessed, and it's just going to create, I would assume, paranoid, safety obsessed children. Now, don't get me wrong, every dad has to make up his mind about what he's letting hypnotize his young children's brains. And I, for one, think my brain would have been much less broken if I hadn't been filling it with hours of video games every day for so many years. But just saying, I'm never going to let them play video games, it doesn't really deal with the real problem, and it's also crushing some good things in the process. Because, actually, some video games are more real than the fake reality in which we currently live. It's just like anime. Yeah, I'll say it. Sometimes anime is more real than reality. and let me explain what I mean by that. Yes, this anime or this video game, it's cartoonish, exaggerated, highly Japanese, and these genres are just full of all kinds of ridiculous, even very dehumanizing trash. But for the truly, truly best stuff, the greatest works within these mediums have haunting reminders of what the world could be, haunting reminders that the world could be other than what it is right now. Like these little oases of beauty in a vast desert of ugliness. Anime and video games portray worlds that we've forgotten in America, where heroes are truly heroic and pure-hearted, where women can actually be gentle and feminine sometimes, where landscapes are cozy or majestic or just beautiful and not soul-crushing to look at, where life can be fun and not just grim drudgery all the time. The best works are full of memories that awaken within us a longing for things that we've forgotten as a society, or that just haven't yet come to be, but maybe could someday. So at their best, video games have the power of myth. And to tell your child they should never play video games, it's just a distraction. It's not just that you're being a stickler and a killjoy to say that. You're also closing off certain vistas of the imagination at its most pure and most wonderful, being rendered in an immersive way that no humans ever before have been able to experience. Maybe it should be surprising to us that people don't play video games even more than they already do because of how enchanting some of them have been able to be, some of them have been made. It's like deciding for a child, I'm not going to tell you fairy tales because they could give you the wrong ideas. That's very lame. I think we need fairy tales to give us the right ideas, even if they aren't quote unquote realistic. It's the same with video games. Play is good. Games are good. Because becoming someone who hates fun doesn't solve any of these problems I mentioned earlier. So, maybe I'm sending some mixed signals here of saying like, yeah, I totally destroyed my life with video games, but I also still think video games are really cool. Despite all of this, I'll still call myself a gamer. Even though I really do regret many of those thousands of hours that I lost to the virtual world of video games. I don't regret all of those hours, though. And in an ocean of wasted hours, there were at least a few hundred of some of the most wonderful, imaginative, inspiring experiences that I've ever had. And not just alone, but with friends too, playing cooperatively. So I don't really care how ephemeral those experiences were. They're so good and so precious that they'll be with me in my memory forever. I just wish that I could have gotten to those moments without all of the garbage. Me, focused on having a good time for myself, alone, at home, in the dark, all alone. You get the idea. There's something sort of gross and pornographic about a lot of gaming, how it's, sort of addictive, compulsive self-pleasuring. And so I think I'm a much less worthy man now than I could have become if, as a young person, I'd been working and living in reality for a lot of that time and having higher goals than just, basic self-amusement. I'm 26 now and kind of feel like an old man. And so I have to admit, I kind of wasted my youth and the energy of youth. And that's one of the most precious things. But you only start desiring it once you realize that you're starting to lose it. And so it goes. I am a Christian and I do believe in eternal life. So I'm not totally heartbroken over the fact that I wasted some time. But I still believe that time on this earth matters. And, once time passes by, it's not coming back. I have hope for an ongoing future and that I'm not just going to be annihilated when I die. But that doesn't mean that any individual sequence of years is you can just squander that on anything. Anyway, I hope you're not taking away from all of this that I'm trying to stop you from playing video games. I'm just suggesting that maybe God is offering opportunities to you that for better ways to spend this brief time you have on Earth than playing the latest Assassin's Creed. It's just a thought. Maybe you don't see those opportunities. I'd be interested to know. Ever since I was little, video games have made me fall in love with the idea of worlds other than this one, both in a good sense and in a bad sense. On the one hand, they awaken the imagination, they give you this realization that life could be more beautiful and enchanting than it is in our kind of soulless modern environment. But on the other hand, it can help you perpetuate this false belief that if you just live out your life in these artificial, virtual representations of other worlds, then that can be a more satisfying way of living than, sort of living in the moment, living in real, flesh and blood meat space next to real people doing real things with real bodies. Once more, I'm not going to scold anyone to try and give up video games because I think video games are actually great. I think we're the ones who suck, who can't control our time well, and who care more about amusing ourselves than looking out for those around us and so on. So keep playing games if you want to. That's your choice. And that could even be your way of choosing to have a good time with life, even if it feels like everything else around you and your family or in society are getting progressively worse. Or you could try to get some new hobbies in real space and get some real life friends, whatever you think you're worthy of. I do have some specific recommendations. Let's say don't buy addictive games just because they're addictive. Don't buy new corporate games. They're not worth it. There's no magic, and they're designed in boardrooms by like committees that are trying to extract your soul and all of your life energy. That's how they thrive. They're like these big parasites and the video game is just this like bait so that they can harvest you for dopamine. Don't let video games be your total purpose in life. God made mankind for something more than just looking at screens and pressing buttons all day. And that's true for not just playing video games, but working in an office where you're staring at a computer for your whole life. Please do something more with your life than just being the best button pusher in your category of button pushing. Don't let gaming get in the way of you actually building something. I think that all around us in society, there are these voids of what could have been built by the young men, or even at this point, the guys in their 30s or 40s who could have built something real for everyone, but decided instead to get their enjoyment in life just from virtual reality. Now, I happen to think that most people in the world are kind of scum. I think most people are mostly worthless. They're better off, maybe, just making themselves feel good and not going out and causing trouble. So maybe it's better if that kind of person just checks out of reality and leaves more space for the rest of us. But I think there's other people who actually have a genuine shot at being worthwhile in the world, at doing something that actually matters. And if those guys are also spending all of their time on the internet, on video games, on all these just kind of ephemeral pleasures, then the real world is more hollow as a result. You don't have to be the kind of person who just checks out of reality. You do have some choices. Maybe you, even you, are one of those chosen few who were meant to build something real, something meaningful in the world. Could be an actual building. It could be a business. It could be forming a family or just a group of friends. It could be moving somewhere new. I think men were made to map the world around them and take territory. That's just this innate instinct that we have. And then when smart men choose to be worthless and they surrender all of their desire to map the world and take territory, they do it instead of in the real world. They channel that desire to just map and conquer virtual spaces that don't actually mean anything. They're just sort of tokens. And it's a way of feeling better about the fact that they're not mapping and conquering things in the real world. I think that the real world is suffering as a result of that mindset. So that's been kind of, negative, don't do these things. Maybe for some positive recommendations, I'd say play classic games instead, games with profound aesthetic vision. Those do exist. And they can truly, I think, awaken your soul and imagination and get you thinking more than you would be capable of just by yourself. Play indie games, made by a real person with vision and passion rather than just soulless corporations, as I mentioned earlier, trying to harvest you and your life essence. Consider playing the best game ever, which is Dark Souls, and realize that it'll never get better than this and that you don't really have to play any more video games after that. It's my personal experience and opinion. Maybe try making your own games. I made a ROM hack once and put my friends into it, and ROM hack of Pokemon. It was great. Made my own dialogue and sprites and stuff like that. Play, this might be the most challenging recommendation. Try playing actual like games of sports with real guys who you know. This builds brotherhood. It's very physical. It makes you feel alive, raises your vital energy, makes you in more control of your body. And I think we just need to like do away with all of these pornographic experiences of sports fandoms. We're just like watching a bunch of other muscular men like do great feats of strength. It's like, forget that. Like, you should be out on a field with your buddies doing great feats of strength. You know, that's way more human, I think, than just watching other guys do it for you. And that's true for video games as well. Like, at that point, you're not even watching real guys anymore. You're just like watching this little avatar of a guy with a big sword go around and chop things up. It's like, maybe I'm not recommending go out into the real world and chop things up with a big sword, but metaphorically, right? Find your metaphorical big sword and go metaphorically chop up some things that need to get chopped up. Find real life ways to achieve some victory. Maybe this will be a thing, maybe it isn't, but try seeing life as an RPG. You know, it's the hardest RPG ever. Resources, experience, equipment, all infinitely harder to acquire in real life than in a game, but also infinitely more rewarding when you have some kind of noble quest that you're pursuing, whether that's conquering something for yourself, gaining some fabled treasure, or even just like serving other people if you're into that. Once you find real life grinds that are actually fun and addicting, it gets hard to go back to grinding in these fake worlds. So to circle back around to the beginning, are video games destroying society? Sort of, but the real problem isn't video games. The problem, as always, is people being worthless, people slowly giving away their time to be devoured by corporations and amusements that don't deserve it. And you can make a choice, and it's a choice you can only make for yourself. Am I going to be heroic about this situation? Or am I just going to shrug, try to have a good time for myself as I feel everything around me becoming progressively worse and worse? Tell me below what you've been thinking about, if you think you play video games too much, or if you wish you had something better to do, or if you feel like your degree of gaming is totally fine and that people shouldn't scold you too much about it, and mom should just focus on making chicken tendies the way that she should. Thank you.